That's it. We are live.
Wow.
Paul McCusker. I feel like every time you're on, it makes me happy. We talk to each other in real life besides just a podcast. But I
Mhm.
was thinking about how it's been far too long since we've made an episode together. So I'm very happy that you're on with me. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Yeah, we'll let the chat continue to populate. But it's going to be a very exciting episode for those of you who are in. Hello, welcome to the Glad Chat podcast. I'm Jordan Pacheco. I'm sitting kind of digitally across from the man, the myth, the legend, director and author Paul McCusker. You may have known some of his works, the Adventure in Odyssey series from Focus on the Family, and he's actually, Paul, you're the first audio drama director I've ever genuinely met. You've done a ton of work for the Augustine Institute. I think of Joan of Arc, of course, Saint Cecilia, Brother Francis. You got a quite few productions under your belt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I may be the only one you've met because there aren't a lot of us around, though the number's increasing. I'm aware, even in the last couple of years, of a lot more audio dramas being produced, primarily in the Christian realm.
Really?
Yeah, even far more than secular. There just seem to be a lot of productions that I've become aware of. So I think that's exciting because that means there's interest, and I also think there's a generation who might have grown up with Adventures in Odyssey and things like that. And they heard what we did and went, oh, well, I can do better than that. And now they're trying to. So that's perfect.
We're going to break it apart. But before we do that, I've had this question I've always wanted to ask you, which is this. What would you say as a Catholic? What is the number one author and number one book that you're obligated to love and defend to the death?
The Bible.
Good. It was good. Yeah.
That's an interesting question. The number one book and author that I'm obligated.
Yeah, one or the other.
Oh, that's too broad. I really don't know how to answer it. Do you have an answer to that
Well,
question?
I was going to say, I feel like there's this obligation to always pay service, rightly so, in so many ways, to Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, right. But here's what I was gonna say. But here, until halfway through the Fellowship is when Tolkien gets good, because here's my heresy of the night. I think that the first half of Fellowship of the Ring just drags, and in terms of story beats, until they get out of the Council of Elrond, I'm like, oh man, JRR, if I have to read one more song from Tom Bombadil, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Yeah, but there's something you need to understand about this. And I don't know that a lot of people do. And this is true for Tolkien and for C.S. Lewis. I remember, I think it was in a letter, one of Lewis's complaints about Alexander Dumas, the French writer who did Three Musketeers.
Yes.
Was he said, I really don't like reading him because his writing, he has the Three Musketeers racing across a field on horseback, and they're just kind of trampling across the field. And I would like to know what kind of field it is. And I assume that means, what is it? Mud? Does it have flowers?
Right.
What does it have? And if you go back to Tolkien and to Lewis and a lot of the writers of that generation, they were huge fans of, for example, George MacDonald. And they were fans, if not fans, but they were raised to a great degree on Jules Verne and on Lewis Carroll and on a lot of these writers who, for them, it was as much about the journey as it was the story. It's describe where you are, describe how wild the place is, describe how different it is, whether it's a natural area or it's a fantasy. So Tolkien and Lewis would have both been interested in the setting as much as the story. So that helped me to understand a lot in terms of, like, Tolkien. It was the same thing. You're reading somewhere in any one of the books, and they're going through thick woods.
Yeah.
And he's describing it, and they're trudging through, and then a branch snaps, and you think something's going to happen. And then it doesn't. It was So I remember reading The Hobbit to my son when he was probably 5 or 6. And we got to the end of it, and I said, well, what'd you think? And he said, I liked it a lot, except for the long, boring parts. And that was The Hobbit.
Yeah, it's a Hobbit, goodness.
But we have to understand that generationally, like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and a lot of the writers in that first half of the 20th century were influenced by the 19th century writers who were as much about the description, the joy of being somewhere.
Yeah.
Alice in Wonderland. You didn't, and George MacDonald, it was as much about where the characters were as it was about anything else, about plot line and storyline. And that helped me to understand the passages. And also, if you're a good prose writer, like Charles Dickens, I love Dickens' writings. And even if he went long paragraphs, I would be enthralled because of the way he was telling the story. And I'm much the same with Tolstoy. I enjoy Tolstoy more than Dostoevsky.
Are you one of the few that doesn't just have War and Peace on his shelf, but has actually read it?
I have been reading it.
There it is.
So, and I'm a slow reader anyway, and I'm juggling like 5 or 6 books right now, that being one of them. And I have a fighting chance of getting through that, because with Dostoevsky, everybody said you have to read Brothers Karamazov. I started it and I got about 100 pages in, and I stopped and I thought, if I have to read one more page of drunken Russians on tirades about something, I'm going to have to throw this book across the room. I just got very tired of it. Whereas with War and Peace, apart from trying to keep the characters straight, War and Peace and Anna Karenina and some of the other writings of Tolstoy, I always felt that his insights into humanity were just wonderfully done. His characters were not overdrawn. They were drawn as real characters, as opposed to Dostoevsky, where you always felt like he was writing as much a type as he was a character, because of points he was trying to make.
I have not yet read Dostoevsky, but I've heard that articulated in a few different places from a few different writers and readers, certainly of Dostoevsky, that it is more kind of the thematic as opposed to the personal, maybe.
Yeah, that's the way to put it. It's like he's got something he's exploring, and in trying to explore it, he's rendered characters and situations to serve the exploration. Now, you could argue that all writers are doing that to some degree. I mean, to me, the best writing is an exploration, but you still want your characters living and breathing in the situations that you've presented to them, as opposed to, I need this type of character to respond to the situation in order to make the point that I'm trying to make, whether it's philosophically, spiritually, politically, or whatever.
I want to return to what you were talking about with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and kind of this coming in the descriptive sort of writing that they have, because that is actually one of the things about, and you write both books and not just plays for audio drama, but screenplays as well you've had. So I always think about the differences here. I was reading a really fun sci-fi series, just devouring these books. And one thing I've always liked about books is that it's acceptable to spend a couple of pages describing a very minute point of the world. So in this case, this sci-fi book, they constantly was talking about how these space battles are taking place in fractions of a second. It's kind of being very realistic in that regard, which is cool, because I usually think of naval combat as a sort of 18th century in space sort of way.
Right.
But they'll spend a couple pages really drilling down to what that means mathematically. And I'm along for the ride. Wherein in a movie, if I was to, if you were to think about that in a screenplay or on a movie, you can't show that in real time. You can't spend 2 minutes describing the taste of Shire food or something. And in your screenplay, you could be descriptive, but I think that it's much more restrictive, because it's very much about how the director from the writer will take that and make it his own. Have you noticed those differences when you go from the mediums?
Well, I mean, very much. And I mean, it's interesting, because I think I was writing scripts. I started off wanting to write novels, and then circumstances took me in the direction of scripts. And a big part of that was an article I read that said, if you seem to find that dialogue comes to you naturally, maybe you should be writing plays. So this was back in late 70s, but and I thought, well, that's interesting. So I took this project that I was working on as a novel, and then began to work on it as a script, and then just found that came very naturally to me. And I realized too that my one of my flaws as a novelist or as a prose writer is I get a bit self-conscious, because I think the real thing is that I'm hearing dialogue in my head all the time.
Yeah.
So if I'm writing a paragraph about two people talking, and I'm trying to describe this setting. The descriptives that I give tend to be less prose and more as if we're describing it verbally, the way people talk. And that doesn't always make for good prose. I mean, you sort of expect your narrator to come out of that or be beyond that. But I always found it hard. I always found like, I always felt like I was cheating, or that it felt unnatural to me to write really embellished prose in that. And then I also found that if characters are being over descriptive, in terms of how they're describing whatever it is they're describing, it's a little bit too flowery or a little bit too well articulated, then I feel self-conscious. It doesn't seem real to me. It doesn't ring true.
As you're speaking, as you're continuing, there's an example I'm gonna bring up of complete anonymity, but someone sent me kind of a couple chapters of something, hoping that maybe I kind of look at it. And coming from the radio show, they kind of wanted me to look at it. So when you said talking about kind of the description, the flowery nature, and how you lose things, it's interesting because I almost feel like I'm guilty of this, certainly. I don't know. It feels almost amateurish to me. Like when you're so overflowing, you're so descriptive that you can't just move along. And there's a right way to really focus into the minutia of details. But at the same time, I feel like it's like everything's an adjective or an adverb. And you have a sentence that's 30 words long and you haven't really gotten anything out of it.
Right. And most writers, whether you're Stephen King, even Tolstoy, Dickens, all of them would argue, if you read The Elements of Style, the Strunk and White, the discipline is trying to reduce to the essential thing that you're trying to communicate. Lewis was the same thing. Don't overwrite. And if you look at Tolkien, even if you argue, wow, he just goes on pages with descriptives about the rocks or the trees or whatever, but none of it's wasted. If you look at his prose is very strong. Dickens is much like that. Tolstoy's like that. You realize you're getting pretty much what you need to get to set the stage for you. Now, we're far more impatient, I think, now. And the shorthand of how we write texts and how we're writing social network things and the number of characters you get or whatever the case may be means that we have reduced everything to an economy that has tipped the scale the other direction. But then again, you also have common experience.
Yeah.
So when C.S. Lewis is writing The Horse and His Boy, and he is describing the boy crossing desert, and just the fatigue and the sun burning on you and the hunger and all the stuff. I remember reading that and feeling it. And I remember thinking, this is really good description of what it must feel like to cross a long, lonely desert you felt it. And Lewis had never been to a desert. Lewis wrote it without ever having walked across a desert. Yeah. So that's a testimony to him. Most of us don't know what it's like to walk across a desert. But the thing with Tolkien is most of us know what it's like to walk through some woods.
Yeah.
So unless there's something special about the woods, something that we need to know about the trees, the leaves, the sounds, to make it come alive for us, I don't know that nowadays we do have the patience for lengthy pages and pages of something that we already understand. And audio drama is the same way. When I'm writing audio drama, the reality is the center point, you could argue, is the common experience. So if I'm writing about two guys talking in a living room, I don't have to do much with that because most people understand what a living room is. Even if there are specifics in their imaginations, it would be different from person to person. You're still generally imagining what kind of living room it would be, or it's in a house, a suburban house, wherever it might be. But the further you get from a common reality, then the harder it is for audio drama.
So you hit something really interesting there, which is, let's even just take a step back. This has been a really surprising thing for myself. When I'm growing up, when I thought of audio dramas, and I didn't grow up on Adventures with Odyssey, we didn't really listen to I don't think we listened to a ton of audio productions. My mom's going to correct me tomorrow about that. But of course, I know of a lot of the great audio dramas of the earlier part of the 20th century.
Sure.
And the tradition that Orson Welles grew out of. And I actually, last year I listened to War of the Worlds again. And one thing I could think of is, man, if someone really did not tune in the beginning or in like the intros when they're telling it's a production, this really is quite terrifying. So it's,
and that's why it was. It caused panic.
Yeah. People are forming militias and stuff out in the Midwest because them aliens are coming. But it's interesting. It's a very unique space. And you starting by saying that not only is it one that you've found success in, but also it's one that you're seeing grow. That's interesting. I'm coming from the world of film where there's such a visual component to things. So it's very exciting to look at the audio side of things and discover that not only have we maintained this great tradition, but we are actually really cultivating some seriously great productions. And I've very much enjoyed, I'm a little bit through Brother Francis right now, but it's a world that immediately immerses itself. And I'm kind of surprised because I feel like film and the visual has been so strong that to kind of take that away, but to still get just this beautiful story out of it, puts you in a very unique position as a director of those things.
Well, you have to remember that, for example, reading. Reading requires a lot of engagement. And, even when you break down the process of reading, it's amazing that you've got symbols on a page that actually we would call letters, and letters form words, and words become sentences and paragraphs. In our brain, the engagement of us when we're reading requires a lot of us, because now we're taking all of that and we're creating, especially with good writing, we are creating in our minds, imagining whatever it is that we're reading. Now, somewhere in the middle of that, you have on the other side of the spectrum would be film, because film, and this simplifies things, but film pretty much gives you everything. Now, it's teasing you. I mean, a good film is teasing you with a lot of different things, but essentially it's doing most of the heavy lifting, because you are watching, they're showing you what you can imagine, and you're embellishing it maybe a bit, but it's basically you're receiving the input of visual and sound and all of the things that go with that. Now, somewhere in the middle, though, you do have stage productions, but you have audio. Because audio does not provide you with everything.
Yeah.
It's giving you, much like books are not giving you anything other than whatever it is that the symbols that are stimulating. Even if you're blind and you're reading Braille or somebody's reading to you, you're having an auditory experience or a visual experience that then triggers the imagination. And with audio drama, you're being given only so much. But what that means is your imagination has to engage at a higher level. So you're imagining at a more intense level, more so, because if I'm watching Star Wars, if I'm watching anything, the Avengers or whatever, it's all there. There's nothing for me to imagine. I don't need a descriptive about Captain America or Luke or whatever. I'm seeing it, it's there, and now I'm engaging in that. But with audio, we are working hard on my end of it to give you an experience that's going to give you something fairly intimate in your imagination. So when we did, for example, we produced the Chronicles of Narnia. So we did all 7. And then you get into the voice of Aslan. Well, that's tough because people reading the books have a particular sound in their head. Even if they couldn't describe it to you, they do. So when we commit to, well, in our case, David Suchet as the voice of Aslan, and I think he was brilliant, we still got letters from people who said, no, I'm not sure that he sounded like that. And I don't know that he sounded like Liam Neeson either. But that's the intimacy of it. The more your imagination engages, because it has to, then the more personal and intimate it becomes. And you could argue that if you're listening, by the way, if you're listening on earpods, you've got somebody whispering in your ear. I mean, that's fairly close and intimate, even if it's a voice or it's sound effects, music, whatever it may be. It's right there in your head, and that has its own power.
I just wanted to say there's been only a couple of times where, in my case, from book to movie, where somehow the imagination, like what I had in my head, was surpassed by something visual, which is strange. Which the biggest time I could think of was Ender's Game. Ironically, it's not that great of a film. They've changed some things, but I realized that when I was reading it, got the whole set for my godparents, I had because the cover of the book had a very kind of 1980s sci-fi look, like pared down sci-fi look to it. And so when I'm reading about the enemy's gates down and everything, and how the maps are represented, I kind of envisioned it almost like that movie War Games, like very simple, rudimentary kind of objects on a general board. And I watched the movie, and it's these like huge special effects space battles, and like even the interpersonal battles of the students. And I went, oh, I gotta adjust adjust what was in my brain. Funny enough, usually you feel almost the opposite way, because you as you said, books and audio, there's a sort of intimacy there, where in film, what you see is what you get. There is not some reimagining of what Aslan, not as Liam Neeson, is for the movie Chronicles of Narnia.
Right.
So it's interesting to kind of have that interplay of, you have actually more space to maneuver in the world of audio. And there's also much more, well, there's still care in film, of course, but there's a special attention and care because there is an intimacy that the listener is going to have.
Well, yeah. And that then it can intensify, which gives a stronger reaction, by the way, if they feel like you've got it wrong or if you cheated. And I think we may have talked about this last time, but the rule with audio drama is that we followed, and I lifted it from an old book written by someone who worked with the BBC. And I had it years and years ago. And it was like one of those underlined things that I thought, this is the rule. Your audience is blind, but you must never make them feel that way. So that means the trick is to present them with enough of the right information, the right sounds and dialogue and everything, that's going to allow them to immerse themselves into the world, which then intensifies the experience without them ever feeling like, oh, wait a minute, you're presenting me with something because I can't see it. For example, exposition. And we see this in TV shows, movies, whatever. And that's exposition. Bad exposition is anytime you have characters more or less saying things to each other that, and they're only saying it because I'm too stupid to know what it is.
Yeah.
So anytime characters are saying things to each other that they really know, then that means they're saying it on behalf of somebody else, which then breaks the fourth wall and reminds me, oh, they're saying this for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would they be saying it? And so there was an actor in England who got revenge. He was a British actor, and he said he did a play that put in all the cliches he was ever forced to say as an actor for audio drama.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the name of the play was "This Gun I Hold in My Right Hand is Loaded."
Mm-hmm.
And it's filled with those lines like, "Oh, gin and tonic. That's an unusual drink for an auburn hair woman like you to be drinking." And all, as soon as you get into that dialogue,
audio dramas.
Sorry,
he had to say that in his audio drama.
Oh my gosh, yes. If you even go back to the classic audio dramas, you'll hear. I think there was a nice subtlety to a lot of them, but you could go back to even the classics, and you're going to hear dialogue in particular that's going to spell out things for the audience. Characters are going to say things that they wouldn't naturally say.
Have we learned in audio dramas as we think of them nowadays? Are we better about allowing the audience to have more of that imagination, or are we getting more clever rather with those elements of control of how we want a character to look or feel or this environment?
Well, it really, there's no simple answer to that question. I don't know that we're better or worse. It depends on the writer. It depends on the production. It depends on a lot of things. So as I was saying a little bit ago, the further we get from a common reality, the harder I have to work to try to present. For example, if we go to St. Francis, St. Joan of Arc, we go to Narnia, we go to things that are further afield from our common understanding. I have to work harder through dialogue, sound effects, all those things, again, without slipping into exposition, whether that's auditory or dialogue or whatever. I have to work harder to figure out how to help the audience to understand. So when I did Christmas Carol and Oliver Twist, Dickens was such a great writer that I said, well, to me, a narrator is like the last resort for me.
Yeah.
But when you have really good writing, you go, okay, I think it's okay. I never call them narrators, they're storytellers, whoever they might be. So we had um, Sir Paul Scofield. Actually, he didn't accept the sir. He was Paul Scofield, who was in Man for All Seasons. He
You had
was
Paul. You worked with Paul Schofield.
Paul Scofield. Yes. So he was in Man for All Seasons. He one of Britain's greatest but underrated actors.
For
And
sure.
he was our storyteller for Narnia.
Wow.
And he came at it as a character. And that
Mhm.
meant he brought personality to it. It wasn't just narration. I am telling you a story. We did the same thing with our Robin Hood production. You know, I basically said, I don't want a narrator. I want a troubadour.
Yeah.
I want this storyteller to be like he's standing on the side of a stage in some pub in the middle of England, telling the story of Robin Hood and gesturing and handing it off. Kenneth Branagh's Henry V did that some with Derek Jacobi as the chorus, as they called it. And they used that very effectively. That to me, if you're going to use a so-called narrator, then it's got to be a character. It needs to be the storyteller. And then the audience will go with it. Oh, you're telling me a story. We all understand what that is. And then you move in and out of scenes with the characters, sound effects, and everything else.
How did you even get into that world? Because you said earlier, and you still do, right? You do write novels, you do write books, and you've done screenplays as well. The closest audio I think of besides my world of film and habit, of course, is this podcast. But even this has this video component to it. How did you come from kind of the writing that you thought you'd set out to do to finding yourself doing audio dramas?
Well, and it was circumstantial or providential. Some might argue,
A little
but
bit of both.
I couldn't have contrived my career. So, but it was circumstantial in the sense of when I moved to dialogue, and I said, "Oh, I like writing dialogue," and my influences were Neil Simon and George Kaufman. I mean, writers that go back into 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Larry Gelbart, for example, he's the one who developed MASH for television.
Oh,
so, and he wrote whatever. What happened on the way to the forum?
my parents met over MASH, by the way.
Sorry.
My
parents,
they met. Yep.
Really?
So yeah, my mom and my dad were in the same college. My mom roomed with my dad's cousin, so he would come over because they had the TV set. And there it is. So that's been a storied show in my family history.
There it is. Well, I loved MASH, especially the first like 3 or 4 seasons before it became a little too self-conscious. It became very 70s self-conscious. But when I moved into that realm, I was the first part of my career, I was writing dramas for churches. So I was in a very arts-minded Baptist church, and we were doing regular productions. I had the ability. I mean, they gave me the means to create sketches, and then I moved on to one-act plays and full-length plays, and I had a place to perform them. It was like, okay, pull your cast together, and we just did, and then I did that. And it came to the attention of Chuck Bolte, who came through. Chuck was part of the Jeremiah People, which was back in the day, a touring group that combined comedic sketches with music, and they would just tour every year. Well, the weird connections, and again, I could not have contrived this. So Chuck and I became friends. He was interested in my working with him, but primarily on the stage show stuff. But then he began consulting with Focus on the Family as they were developing this new kids thing that later became Adventures in Odyssey. And then he came back to me and said, well, they're looking for writers. Are you interested in doing audio drama? And now I had toyed with that years before, just as a kid playing with it. But I thought, well, does it pay? Not much, but yes, it does. I thought, well, I'd like the experience of doing that for people who are really intentional and might have the means to do it and do it well. And I'll often take on projects because I want the experience to do it. I want to stretch a little bit and explore some things that I just haven't done before. So I said yes, and it completely redirected my life and career.
Wow.
Basically, it moved me away from stage dramas and even primarily for a while from anything resembling novels or things like that into audio drama. And then because I did it such a long time, it graduated into Focus on the Family Radio Theater, which then were the bigger productions, full blown record in England and produce at a whole other level. So if Odyssey was like our TV shows, the radio theater stuff was like our feature films. So, and then that just rolled into basically my life and career and most of the work that I've done, even though I have done novels and screenplays and things like that too. But I think it's fair to say that audio drama has been the center point of most of my work.
Can you take me through what set or how perhaps set might feel like in an audio drama? So something that I've been very happy about is I've had the opportunity to film some studio things when it comes to music and not so much the behind the scenes when it comes to audio drama. But I just think about, do you have all of your actors in the same room? Do they bring in, do you costume them? Do you bring props? I've seen this for when they do video games sometimes, that they'll have actors in the same room, even though they're in the mocap suits, they still have props and things like that. How do you structure that sort of environment?
Well, the old BBC style was that. If you listen to the old BBC radio dramas, they would have microphones kind of in the center of the room. They'd have something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would perform around the mic. And then you'd have sound effects there. Or the actors would create sound. We knew from the get-go with Odyssey that we were not doing it that way.
Why was
which has
that?
thrown some of the actors. And we didn't want to do the animation style, which is generally individual mic,
Yeah.
but individual performances isolated from everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
You just bring the actors in pretty much one at a time. They're not really playing off of each other for the most part. And what we wanted was the mix of two things. One, our sound designers wanted clean recordings.
Got it.
In other words, everybody, the camera is on them. The microphone is their camera.
Mm-hmm.
If they're off mic, they're out of the shot. But to record them as clean and pure as possible, so that if you were moving a character from a living room to the middle of the woods or out in the desert, there was nothing to betray that they weren't really there. You don't hear the room. That's the goal. You don't hear the studio. Because, in the old movies, you would do that. I was watching something not too long ago, and I had Jimmy Stewart in the middle of the woods, and he's shouting for somebody, and you can hear the studio. It sounds nothing like the woods.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. And people accepted that at the time until they went out to more natural, like John Ford and those who actually went out on location. So that was the first difference for us. And it actually threw our actors in England because they were so used to acting around the microphone.
Yeah.
And when we're saying, no, you don't have to do that. Just stay on the microphone. We want your voice. We want all the acting in your voice. That then allowed them to, in a very pure way, lay in sound effects and the music and be able to place the voice wherever we needed the voice placed in Narnia or in the middle of Sherwood Forest or whatever. And so that was a big difference for us over actually the style of a lot of others. That was a main thing. And then you write for that. You're aware of that, but you realize it opens up possibilities, especially when we move from cutting tape into the digital reality of so much more that we could do.
I can't imagine. So even just thinking about the screenplay, of course, in a book, you might have pages where you can describe whatever you want to and conduct yourself that way. In a screenplay, you'll see interior bar night. Jenny sits at the bar. The bartender slides a glass of whiskey. She turns and Frank enters. Frank's lines here. For an audio drama, just in terms of the script, how do you set that world? Are you just briefing the actors? Do you give these overviews prior?
Well, it depends. Well, yes. I mean, you've got to give, as a director, I've got to give the actors their setting, and that way, if they're in a crowded bar, we have to remember you need to project a little bit more, because you're in that, as opposed to a confessional or whatever. And so you try to make sure they understand. But I also learned because I worked with the same guys on a team, I don't want to call it laziness, but my scripts took on a sort of shorthand because we all had a common understanding of what I meant if something was taking place in Wit's End or somewhere in Odyssey or whatever it was. But then as I've worked with people that I had not worked with, I realized I had to put more into the script because what I was assuming they would understand, they wouldn't necessarily understand. So when I talked about the church in Assisi or something in Rome or wherever the setting was, I began to catch on that by the time we got to the final mix, what they were assuming is not what I was assuming.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll even do links, to YouTube or to something or a website article so that they can understand what it is that I'm referencing.
Yeah.
Just the basic assumptions for a scene. So yeah, if it's going to be a normal, unless there's something special about the bar, two people go in for a drink or a cafe, or they're walking down the street. Unless we already have a common understanding, I may have to get specific that there's heavy traffic on the street. So that means they have to project more, and that means that they're competing. I'm trying to create an environment that's very specific for a particular reason versus any other thing that I might be presenting to them. So the scripting has changed for me over the last few years because I couldn't assume the common understanding, and I needed to begin to get very specific in certain things. I don't like to direct from the page, and I don't like to encroach on the sound designers much. I want them to know what the essentials are, but I don't want to spell it all out for them so they're sort of locked in or second guessing too much the specifics because I'm being specific, and then you lose some of the imaginative playfulness that you really want between the writer, the director, who happens to be the same person. But even as the writer, I'm different from the director.
Yeah.
And people, the actors know that when I'm in the studio, in a way, I don't care what the writer wanted. If it's not working, we have to change it.
Yeah. God bless you for separating yourself like that. I know some friends who do that, and it's like they're getting ripped in half, right?
Well, and in a way you have to. It's just two disciplines.
Yeah.
I know what was in my head, but really it depends on if it's not working, it's not working.
Yeah.
If the lines aren't coming out right, there's a point where I've been in the studio and said, you know what, let's go ahead and make a change on that. I'll have a word with the writer about it later. And I've had the actors kind of look, and they look at the top of the script and this is you, right? It's like,
you're already off your trailer.
I'll talk to myself later about how
that's right.
that I shouldn't try to do that on the page in the future or whatever it was doing.
I can't quite remember your response, but when it comes to the world of audio acting, do you have kind of where your actors bring props or they dress in a certain way to help foster?
Yeah, you'd ask that. And no, we don't ask them to do that.
Okay.
I mean, they can, whatever might get them into the zone, but yeah, I'm not going to have them dress up in tights as Robin Hood or as Oliver Twist or whatever the case may be. I leave it to the actors to be the experts as actors. So but honestly, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where somebody came in dressed a particular way or brought in props or something that might make them feel more like the character they were playing. They just came in and acted, and however they needed to prepare for that was up to them. I didn't, because every actor is different anyway.
Yeah. That's right. There must be, I mean, what might be those special preparations? So for instance, I watched the second to last Mission Impossible movie last night. And I was watching some scenes today, and one of the people we know said, "Oh, that's Haley Atwell. She was in our St. Cecilia audio drama." And we went to the promo, and I went, "Oh my gosh." So first off, the world's way smaller than everyone believes. Everyone's only 2 or 3 people removed from Tom Cruise, apparently. But I was just thinking, you use in a lot of your audio drama, not just big name actors, but big name film and theater actors. So I of course know John Rhys Davies, who is in St. Patrick, Haley Atwell. There's so many. In my head, I'm just thinking, okay, acting already from the stage to film is different. Stage, generally speaking, we're to an audience here. Acting for film, it's little, the camera does a ton of the work. So do you kind of have to tweak how your actors need to adjust when it comes to maybe they're experienced in film, but now they're stepping into the world of audio drama?
And they have to know.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of actors will say, actors will say that they can do anything, but we have worked with some actors who did not know how to work with just their voices. And I will say, we had approached, obviously before he died, we had approached Peter O'Toole about a role, and he turned us down. And he actually is one of the few actors who turned us down because he said, "I'm a film actor. I don't act with just my voice. I don't think I would do that very well." And I respected him for that, because he recognized the difference. A lot of actors don't, and then they get in, and you can tell they're struggling. They're struggling because all their props, their acting props for the camera or for the stage, don't help them much. It can help them a bit, but I'll tell you what will prove or disprove, and it's something as mundane as acting out sitting down in a chair. We call them, I think in the game industry, they're called efforts, or they're called, I just went blank on it, but, and I just call them grunts. I'll say, "I need you opening a large door," grunt. Climbing into the car, grunt. I need you sitting down and you're very tired, so you need to sit down in a big chair, or you're going to slip into a comfortable chair. And it says a lot, because a lot of really good actors don't know how to make that noise. They really don't know. You become self-conscious because on film, well, you just sit down, and you know intuitively that if you're tired, you ran into the room and now you get a chance to sit down, you know what you sound like, and the camera's going to capture it and reinforce it anyway. But when it's nothing but you and the microphone, and you say, "I need you to give me the sound of sitting down into a chair," and it doesn't even have to be laborious. It doesn't have to be anything other than just to reinforce in the listener's minds that you've sat down in a chair. And it's interesting, the number of actors who really don't know, or they do a cliche sound, or something, and it doesn't sound right.
Well, I love this comment here. "Grunting while sitting becomes so much easier as you age." You just bring in their voice double for the grunts then.
Yeah, well, you almost have to. Sometimes our sound designers have done it, and it doesn't become easier. In fact, it's funny, like somebody older, just listen to older people getting out of a chair. The speed with which, as we age and it hurts more, or you've got bad knees, or whatever it may be, there is a different sound, and it's got to sound real. And I'll tell you, there's an actor named David Calder who played a bishop in Robin Hood. Now, David is a film actor, and he's probably known more for that than anything. But there's a scene where Robin's merry men tie him to a tree. And I will say, in all the years I've been doing this, that actor, without any prompting from us, his efforts were perfect. I didn't have to direct him. I didn't have to tell him where to put it. I didn't have to say, "I need you to grunt here because they're tightening here." His instincts were so good that he did the vocalizations, and they were absolutely perfect. And until you hear them, you're not even aware of how intuitive it really is. Where it sounds like somebody's acting it or faking it, as opposed to a very natural sound. Oh yes, that's what it sounds like to be tied to a tree. It was a lesson for me very late in my career about how it can be done.
Wow. That there's so many of your productions that I still have to listen to, but I'm very happy when I do get to listen to them. And we'll talk about Hope Springs in a little bit. One of the things about Hope Springs, though, which of course, based on your series, which I didn't know, by the way, we've met relatively recently. I didn't grow up with a lot of your stuff, and now I'm having to play catch up.
Mhm.
But let me just tell you, I mentioned over a year ago, or just about, to a group of the children of a fellow coworker, and I'm like, oh yeah, we at the Augusta Institute, we're producing Hope Springs, Paul McCuskers, and their eyes popped out of their head because they were apparent super fans, and they immediately began to bombard me with all these questions. Oh, is so and so going to be in here? What's going to happen here? One of them was like, I have this whole idea for a story that takes place in Hope Springs, and like, or gave me a Nick and Sam idea or something, and I was like, no, this is really, really great. So before we get to the meat and bones of Hope Springs, I just want to say, I like how it takes place, of course, Hope Springs, Colorado, but a lot of your productions are with British actors, and you do a lot of productions across the pond. And I gotta tell you, the fact that we even have Brits playing the French still in the 21st century, I think just means, have the Brits just cemented themselves as the audio drama staples? Do they still have a grip on this world?
Yes. And that's why we recorded over there. Apart
Yeah.
from the fact that we wanted authentic English accents, like the very first production we did for radio theater was Christmas Carol. So it made perfect sense we would record in England, and we figured out how to do it. And actually, it would have been less expensive than recording in LA.
Dang.
And we had worked all that through. But the truth is, there's a different sensibility there. So, for example, in America, if you were to do a hierarchy, you would say, okay, so an actor starts, he's a stage actor.
Mm-hmm.
And if he gets a lucky break, and while he's a stage actor, he might do audio drama, if anybody's even doing audio drama.
Yeah.
But then they would graduate to television, and then they'd be a TV actor. And then what happens with most American actors? They would try to graduate from a TV series to become a feature film actor.
Yeah.
And then they do that. And then they graduate, and then they don't really go back. And in the old days, not so much now because of the way the media has changed, but going back not too long, for an actor to go from a feature film career back to TV felt like, oh, well, he must be slipping.
Yeah.
His popularity is sliding or whatever. It's changing again because of Netflix, because of platforms and what they're spending on things. So the shift from feature films back to TV isn't what it used to be. But in England, they never really had that. In fact, the prestige, if you were an actor, your prestige was in doing stage plays. And this whole thing of doing movies and then TV was an oh, by the way. It wasn't considered the career enhancer as a hierarchy. So over there, it was not unusual for a Judi Dench or for Brian Blessed or Kenneth Branagh or any of these actors who had come up through what Americans would have thought of as a hierarchy. No, while they're doing a stage production, they might slip over and do a film. And then while they're doing the film, if they've got, a week, and this is how we got Haley Atwell. This is how we often were able to get certain actors, because they just finished a film and they had 2 or 3 weeks in between projects. And we went to the agent, and the agent went to them and said, yeah, they need you for 3 days in the studio. And I was like, great. They would come in because they weren't thinking of hierarchy. They're thinking, I'm interested in the part. I like acting, and they're going to pay me to get to come in and just, I don't have to dress up. I don't have to do makeup. I don't have to do anything. I get to just roll out of bed, come in and use my voice. So they never really had that. And that makes a big difference, because that meant if you were a jobbing actor and you knew you couldn't count on getting all the feature films or getting TV shows or whatever, you were taking work where you get it. And a lot of our actors on the audio dramas were often on stage at the same time they were working with us. They'd have to be out by 2:00 to get to the theater because they had a matinee or whatever. And so that sensibility made all the difference.
Yeah.
So you go over there, and it's rare to find actors who don't know how to act with just their voices. And we've met them. They exist.
Yeah.
But not like LA, where if you are if you're a voice actor, you are either doing commercials, games now. Games would be a big thing. That's huge.
Yeah.
Not so much audio drama, but commercials, animation, and games.
Yeah.
Games,
Yeah.
I guess you could say, would be an extension of animation. So somebody like Nathan Fillion, is just in a lot of the games, that sort of thing. So that's the big difference is the way the discipline works there. And that's why we would go there to record like everything. I love working with the British actors because they just know what they're doing more so than because the discipline's just not really taught here.
Yeah. Nonetheless, congratulations. I'm alive to see you working on another Yank production. So so tell us, and again, it's cool hearing the buzz around from friends in the circles I inhabit. So tell me what Hope Springs is. This is your latest production. And as far as I can tell, I've listened to a couple episodes and it's fantastic. I am glued in. I'm gonna have to read the books now, but it's a big undertaking. And I know that you work with a lot of big casts or different size casts, but it seems like this one's very sizable. So just give us a premise a little bit, and then also some of the inner workings of it.
Well, so when Dr. Tim Gray and I met, and for those who don't know, he's the founder and president of the Augustine Institute. And he knew Adventures in Odyssey. He knew Adventures in Odyssey primarily through Scott Hahn, who is a huge audio drama fan of Odyssey, of the radio theaters, of all of this. But so Tim knew, and I think Tim's desire was for the Augustine Institute to create audio dramas, and in particular to create an audio drama. I don't want to say like Adventures in Odyssey, but basically targeted in the way Odyssey is for that mythical kind of 10, 11-year-old, which is a wonderful age. If you're writing for that age, that means you're writing for younger kids, but without writing down. And also older kids would listen, and we know adults listen, and grandparents and all that.
Yeah.
So we met and we talked, and I knew it was his desire, and I was keen. Having been received into the Catholic Church, I kept wondering, could I do anything for the Catholic community like I'd been doing for the evangelical Protestant community for 35 years or whatever. So, and the answer was yes, Dr. Gray made that possible. Well, when we first started, it was like, well, let's do audio drama. But I said, I need time to develop this. I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And even I'd already, before I'd come on staff, already had ideas for what I would like to do. And he loved what it was going to be. But we said, I think we need to test to see if the Catholic community even wants audio drama. So that's why we said, well, let's do these other dramas first. St. Francis and Saints, of course, and St. Robin Hood. And we said, let's test and see and build the team. Let's get it all together. But while we do that, rather than just sort of creating this town and the inhabitants of the town and making it up as we went along, kind of like we did with Odyssey. I mean, we had a foundational thing that had been created by Phil Allor and Steve Harris, in terms of some core characters, and that it expanded from there. I said, well, what I ought to do is write these novels for kids to test and to build the Hope Springs idea. Yeah. So because of Word of Life and because of other curriculum stuff we were doing, I said, well, we need story components. So The Adventures of Nick and Sam came out of that. And I went, great, I'm going to introduce the world of Hope Springs. And then while I was doing that, then I did the Virtue Chronicles, which is for the older group, but it's time travel. Yeah. But I need to make it work with Nick and Sam. In fact, it's the older brother of Nick and Sam who's in the Virtue Chronicles. And so I began to create this world, the consistency of just not only the town, but the world of the town and the people there and the connecting points and the mythology of it. It's not like Andy of Mayberry. It's not even like Odyssey. It's different from Odyssey. And so I wanted time to develop that. So honestly, for 8-9 years, I was developing the world of Hope Springs through the novels and through the short stories, Gabriel's Quest, Small Wonders, Virtue Chronicles. I was developing it, knowing then when we got to the audio dramas, it was still going to be different, and yet it had to dovetail into what I'd already created.
Yeah.
but it's an audio drama, so it's not like the books. And we knew we weren't going to just dramatize the books. It had to be its own world within the world, and that's what we have been. I've been developing, and then we went into the studio last October, recorded what we're calling season 1. We just did season 2, which we're in production on now, and I will begin working on scripts for season 3. I've already been working out the ideas for season 3, but I'll dive into the scripts probably mid-June.
How many seasons do you anticipate?
As many as we can do.
There we go.
Odyssey has 1,000 episodes.
Yeah.
And Tim Gray said to me that he would like Hope Springs to have 1,000, but I think he wants them in the next 5 years. As opposed to the 30 plus years it took to do the Adventures in Odyssey 1,000. But honestly, this thing will go, I think, as long as we can do it, and as long as there's an audience to receive it.
Can you give a brief synopsis of what Welcome to Hope Springs entails?
Well, it's centered around, so the Adventures of Nick and Sam were first reader books.
Yeah.
So I was writing for 8-9-year-olds, that group, and then expanding from that, because I don't write down to the audience. I'm mindful of the appropriateness of themes and things like that. But I agree with, it sounds pompous to even say it that way. I agree with C.S. Lewis.
All right.
But you don't write down to kids. I mean,
yeah,
good stories are good stories. You're just tailoring a little bit of things so as not to make the parents angry by introducing things into the kids' lives that parents feel awkward trying to explain. So having created the foundation of this small Colorado town with certain quirkiness about it, the Welcome to Hope Springs parallels everything that I've written in the world. So it's centered on the town.
Yeah.
But in the case of the audio, one of the entrepreneurial wealthier persons is Clark Perry. And I introduced this back in the Nick and Sam books. He's the uncle to Nick and Sam. And he has built like a resort up in the mountains. And one of his things was to restore the town's depot, the train depot that had been derelict for years. And so what he's done is he's restored it. It looks beautiful. And then it has all these nooks and crannies, shops and a museum and all these different things that allow us to make it the center point of a lot of the kids' activities so that the kids can go there. Because we didn't want to set it in school exclusively. We didn't want to set it in one character's house. It's a group of kids. And these kids in particular have been friends since kindergarten. And so they've got all that friendship and antagonism that comes with kids who've known each other for this period of time. And so we're focused on several kids. Right now we're at the end of summer. School will start. So that means that's season 3. At some point, they're going to go back to school. And then we have that dynamic. And really, it's the adventures that they have. And the adventures range from sort of slice of life, normal kid stuff for that age, 10, 11, 12 years old, all the way through to mystery and some weirdnesses, some things that are hard to explain because
it's going to be the Stranger Things of Colorado.
Well, yeah, I can't seem to get away from it. I'm finding as I'm more and more, I mean, I've always been drawn to that stuff.
Yeah.
So I did the Father Gilbert mysteries, which Scotland Yard detective becomes an Anglican priest, but there's always something supernatural going on around him. And it's the same thing. There's an exploration going on in Hope Springs. And I think because Catholics and Catholic faith and Catholic imagination in many respects allows for it even more than, let's say, other denominations, other stripes. We could just, because we are sacramental, because the saint stories that we have and some of the just whacked out stuff and supernatural phenomenon and apparitions and appearances and things in 2,000 years of Christianity, I thought, well, we can't argue against it.
Mm-hmm.
We could be the Enlightenment rational. Oh yeah, but it happens, but not that much, and not quite like that. Whereas I find, as a Catholic writing stories, I have a lot of room for imagination, and I exercise that in the world of Hope Springs. Does that answer the question? I haven't been able to figure out the elevator pitch, which is always a problem. But
well, you're fortunate that this is a podcast, not a 2-minute segment. So I'm over here.
Yeah,
Like,
if you gave me that, I could probably have condensed it, But and we have certain quotes and phrases that we kind of world of wonders and mysteries and everyday wonders and eternal mysteries. I mean, it's this kind of thing that I think captures it. And there's a lot of history kind of buried in the show.
Well, and you
trying to connect present day to the bigger picture of history.
That's exactly it. You've built, and it's already in this world that so many of your listeners, certainly, and your readers, of course, are familiar with, which is cool, because I do think there is something very endearing about. Again, I'll use the Stranger Things analogy, because for the longest amount of time I had a Stranger Things beanie and I never watched the show, and I got so much mess from everybody, and finally I watched it. But one thing about that show, which I think is interesting, that works, is the setting is in that case it's Hawkins, Indiana, which doesn't really strike like the New York of the Midwest, but you have this interplay of a coming of age kind of slice of life, things happening with these kids that also then, of course, has a supernatural bend. And so to hear that, like, you have, and in the case of Hope Springs, the room to maneuver is really exciting, because I have listened to a few episodes. By the way, when is first season out, or when does it drop?
First season. We are
this.
discussing that. It'll come later in the year.
Okay, good.
Later this year.
You're hearing must move faster, than film seasons, because if you're already in production for episode or for season 3.
Yeah. Really, it's strategic. It's just about when is the best time to release. When do you want to introduce the audience to this in a way that we can effectively release it? That's a big thing, is how are we getting it out there, on what platforms, in what way, how do we make people aware of it? And but the idea is to, in essence, to stockpile. So while they're listening to season 1, what we did not want was long gaps. We don't want to do like Yellowstone or any of those where, you get your first clump of episodes, then you got to wait 2 years for the next 6, or whatever the case may be. We want a shorter time span between the seasons. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve now. So when it comes out, season 1 comes out, there won't be that long to wait before then season 2 appears. And then hopefully the same with any season after that.
Well, how fun it is to move in a world where there are elements of mystery and exploration, but also it's seen through the lens of these group of friends who know each other, who have sort of cultivated their quirks and their friendships in different ways. Yeah,
and I think it allows for because their reactions, and they're specific characters. They're not all meant to be generic. They're not at all, in fact. They're very specific, and yet in the way they're specific, I think they're relatable to the kids in the audience. So if our target age is going to be 10, 11 years old, and I love that age, because kids have come out of, let's call it childhood, even though you could argue they're still children. Yeah, they've come out of the little kid reality, but they haven't gone into all of the complexities of adolescence. Yeah. So there's this innocence and purity and everything that seems to happen in that mythical 10, 11, 12 age range, that Odyssey was built on that. And to me, it was never a question. It's the age that I wanted to write for. Again, not in the same way. In fact, I spend a lot of my time rejecting ideas that I want to do, because then I think, oh, wait a minute, I did that in Adventures in Odyssey. I'm not going to do that again. If I'm going to do that, I've got to find another way to do it that won't trigger the comparison. Yeah. I know there'll be some comparisons from some people who will just go, oh, well, you did this. Oh, that must mean that you're just redoing that. But I wrote a lot of episodes for Odyssey, and the truth is I don't remember most of them anyway. If you ask me specific questions, I'll remember. But as I'm creating fresh, like I've never done it before. So if I think of it, if I think, oh, wait a minute, I did do something like this, then that means that it left enough of an impression that I know I don't want to do it again.
You said in the very beginning that this audio drama space is growing.
Yes.
And so, I'm just kind of curious. You said and it's growing in kind of the Christian spaces. When I think about audio dramas, I like to listen to the Exorcist Files, for instance, which is, part the interview talking to father and also part the actual audio production of it.
Right.
What is facilitating maybe the growth of audio dramas? Is it the digital age? Is it the expansion of podcasts, ease of access, better?
Well, you have to go backwards a little bit, and it's technological. This is the wild thing about this. When Adventures in Odyssey started in the mid to late 80s, people said, hey, it's the MTV generation. You're not going to succeed. Why in the world would you be doing an audio drama?
Yeah.
And that's a fair question. But Focus on the Family was a radio-based organization. It was the first discipline that they knew best. And they had the inroads into it in the evangelical Protestant world. So it made sense for them to do something, even if it seemed to be going against all the trends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now if we go back the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the rise of audio technology, devices, these things, I mean, in many ways, you can argue that Apple resurrected. I say Apple is pretty much kind of the lightning rod for it, but they were the ones who resurrected the renewal of audio because of the ease of transportation, the ease to use it. So rather than fumbling around with, in the old days, cassettes and then CDs, suddenly I've got an entire library of music on here.
Yeah.
And that means a library of this emerging reality. Then you have smart speakers. Then you have all kinds of means to listen in the car, to listen at the gym, listen to wherever you are, and the desire of parents to have things for their kids to listen to. And so the rise of that over the last 15 years has been enormous. And so because of that, you do have the rise of podcasts. You do have the rise of all the other audio formats. And people are engaged because of ease of use, because I think of the imaginative intimacy that comes from it, and our desire as people have moved from reading, as people have moved from other things. I think it's inherent in us. Many of us had parents who read stories to us as kids.
Yeah.
So to have someone reading to us is a nice thing. We like it. So we're in the car, people plug it in, they're listening to some book they're interested in, they're learning. A study was done, they call it me time, that a lot of people covet the audio portion of their day as me time. I get to get away from everybody, immerse myself into this narrator reading a book or an audio drama or a podcast. And it takes me out of my world into another world that I happen to find very interesting, and I engage in it. So all of that is built to where we are. And I think funding, whether it's crowdfunding, things like that. Now, the rise of audio drama, I've seen it mostly in the evangelical Protestant world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot going on in the Catholic world too. But I'm fascinated by the fact that the audio drama is coming in Christian realm, maybe even more, though historically now you could say, okay, Harry Potter. So what began to happen in the audiobook world was they started off with a storyteller, a narrator, and then they moved into, we'll add music. Yeah. Let's add sound effects. You know what? Let's add some more voices.
Mm-hmm.
So what they began to create was this hybrid audiobook that was more and more like audio drama, but without them calling it that.
Yeah.
And now you've got this blur of between, this is part of our marketing struggle, is how do you present something like we're doing when you've got the Exorcist Files, which is both documentary-like in terms of people podcast talking about it, but then they actually go into a drama. And the drama is done like we do our dramas.
Yeah.
Not as well, of course, because nobody does it as well.
It's easy.
But that to me has been fascinating, because now when we're presenting a Hope Springs, what do you call it? And what do you call it in a way that people will understand what it is? Because with our other audio dramas, we struggled to explain to people what radio theater was, or what we meant by audio drama. It wasn't one person. Robin Hood has 60 actors in it, with sound effects and custom music and everything mixed to give you a cinematic experience in your imagination. But that's really hard to explain to people until they hear it, and then they kind of get it.
My last question, what would you say is the secret sauce? What is the couple of things that you know are absolutely necessities for a crisp, good audio drama?
Well, it's the same thing with everything else. I mean, one is you've got to start with a good story.
I thought you were going to say money, but okay.
Well, yeah, that's a given. Somebody's got to put up the money,
Right.
but to do it. But you can do it without money. You just may not get very far with it. But yeah, it's going to be the same with any story thing, whether it's film, TV, stage play, whatever. You have to have compelling characters, a compelling story, characters, all of those things in place. Audio drama just happens to be the means, much like a stage or much like a camera. It happens to be the means that we are telling that story. So you've got to have that first. But then it's understanding the rules and the dynamics of audio drama itself. Much as an actor needs to understand how to act for the microphone, we also, and hopefully have learned over the years, how to tell these stories in a way that helps heighten the imagination and keep people engaged. Well, what are those basic rules? I mean, I've told you one of them. Your audience is blind, but must never be made to feel that way.
Yeah.
But there are other things too that I take for granted, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know. But only because I've been doing this for 40 years or whatever. And those are the things that make the difference. How are you telling the story through sound alone in a way then that keeps your audience with you? And one of the big things you do, and you'll know as a filmmaker, your first question is, why should anyone care? Why does anyone care about what it is that the story I'm trying to tell? What's grabbing people? What's drawing them in? What are they interested in? And you do that well. And it's amazing what you could do stories about. You could do something that sounds incredibly mundane. And yet if you're telling it well, people will engage. A lesson for me, by the way, was years ago. I lived in England twice in the 90s.
Yep.
And I remember sitting and England at the time seemed to have 4 channels. It was like BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, and Channel 4. And I was flipping channels, 4 channels, trying to figure out. I was channel surfing in a very small stream. And I stumbled onto, of all things, a documentary they had produced about automobile safety. And all I remember is thinking, I don't care. But I happened to leave it on. And they had me in the first minute.
Whoa.
The way they structured, I would say the British have been ahead of us. Now we've caught up in their documentary making. But this 1-hour special was about the history of automobile safety. And they got me in the first minute, and I watched the entire thing, and I learned tons of things that I did not know. And I would not have sought that out, but because they were good storytellers, they knew how to grab me. And that's essential.
Paul, you're a gentleman and a scholar. For audience listeners and viewers, look out for Hope Springs coming out later this year. Looks like I got a sneak peek, yours truly. Any links or anything, Paul? Where can we find your finest work?
Oh my word. I don't know, Amazon. I don't know.
We go.
I mean, I have a website, paulmccusker.com. I don't even know that it's been updated in a while. If people want to have any idea of what I work on or have been working on, Amazon is one way to go. Stuff I've done in the Catholic world would be, of course, in our Catholic marketplace and other places like that. And all good establishments that sell the best. But I don't know. It's my stuff is all over the place.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for sitting down and talking shop. I'm gonna hit the books. I think I was a few chapters in St. Francis last time I checked, so I'm gonna rekindle that since I'm done with my audiobooks currently. And I appreciate it. So thank you, and God bless. Indeed, most interesting. And for all of our listeners and viewers, please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already to the podcast. If you'd like to support, going over to patreon.com/GladTrad podcast and see not just my work here, but also see all of Paul McCusker's very fine work wherever, as he said, the choice cut audio dramas and books are sold. Until next time, God bless you and may it keep you. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.
Thanks.